Mr. President.
The senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. If it's required, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to vitiate any quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to make pending the Vitter amendment, which is at the desk, and I'll be happy to explain what it's about. I didn't think that was necessary, but if it's necessary, I ask consent to set aside the pending amendment and make the Vitter amendment pending.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will report.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive reading of the whole.
The clerk will report by number.
The senator from Louisiana, Mr. Vitter, proposes an amendment numbered 568.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'll read it. It's very short, and I'll explain it. This amendment simply says none of the funds appropriated or otherwise made available by this act shall exceed the level of the concurrent budget resolution for fiscal year 2012. That's the entire amendment, quote, unquote. Mr. President, the point this amendment makes is a pretty simple but basic and important one. We don't have a concurrent budget resolution for fiscal year 2012. We're in the process of passing an appropriation bill with this bill, spending money without a budget, without a game plan, without a framework. And that's clearly putting the cart before the horse and clearly having things backwards in a dysfunctional process. Mr. President, every Louisiana family, every Louisiana small business, as families and businesses do in Minnesota, sit down and make a budget, and then they spend money under that budget. That's the rational, straightforward way to do things. Unfortunately, that's not what we're doing here in Congress and here in the Senate. Now, Mr. President, this simple, straightforward process is not only rational, it's not only commonsensical, it's also required by law. Under federal law, the Congress is mandated to pass a budget, to pass a concurrent budget resolution by April 15th of every year. Now, we're months beyond April 15th, several months and counting. And not only do we not have this required budget, this game plan, this framework, which we're supposed to be living by, but here on the Senate side, we haven't even made a meaningful effort to get there. The distinguished chairman of the Budget Committee has not made an effort in committee to come up with a Senate budget resolution. There's been no effort in committee, and so no Senate budget has been sent to the floor. And in fact, Mr. President, the same thing happened in the previous fiscal year. So we're now not just several months past this year's April 15th deadline, but we're over 800 days since the last time we had a budget resolution as required by federal law. 800 days, over 800 days and counting. Mr. President, I'm afraid this is exactly the sort of thing the American people shake their heads at. This is exactly the sort of thing they scratch their heads about, shake their heads at, and say, what is wrong in Washington? Every Louisiana family has a budget that they have to live within. Every Louisiana small business has a budget, and that's their framework, and they operate within that. And yet, Congress apparently doesn't get it, particularly the Senate doesn't get it under this majority leadership, and isn't even making an attempt to do what is not only a good, sound idea, but is required by federal law. So again, Mr. President, I just suggest that we put first things first. We have a budget, and then we only spend money, only pass appropriation bills pursuant and consistent with that budget. And that's why, again, Mr. President, my amendment is very simple. Quote, none of the funds appropriated or otherwise made available by this act shall exceed the level of the concurrent budget resolution for fiscal year 2012, close quote. Mr. President, I urge us all to do the right thing. We'll have different ideas about a budget. We'll have different priorities. We'll have an important and a healthy debate. But we need to follow the law. We need to follow common sense. We need to have a budget and then only pass spending and appropriation bills under that budget and consistent with it. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I would ask that we initiate the quorum call and be recognized.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I share very much the sentiments of my colleague from Louisiana, Mr. Vitter, but I would urge us to not support the amendment because the Senate has already ruled on this question. When we debated whether to take up this bill or not, we voted on a cloture motion in order to bring up an appropriations bill. Now, normally we would want to pass a budget amendment before bringing up an appropriations bill. And it has been, I think, over 800 days since the leadership of this institution has even written and presented a budget. But I would put forward that this bill is rather unique because it conforms to the budget. It conforms to the House Paul Ryan budget that passed the House on April 15th. The legislation before us, I think, is coming before the Senate because Chairman Johnson and I have agreed to put a VA Milcon bill that is $1.255 billion in discretionary budget authority below the President's request. We are coming in $620 million below the 2011 enacted level. And we all remember that the House of Representatives has already adopted the VA Milcon appropriations bill under Chairman Culberson, and the Senate bill actually spends in budget authority on the discretionary side $2.5 million less than the House bill. Because we did that, 71 to 26 was the vote on cloture to bring this bill up, including the support of the Republican leader, Mr. McConnell, and our Vice Chairman on the Republican side of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Cochran. I do think that for a bill that has been endorsed by the Veterans of Foreign Wars and other veterans service organizations, a bill that gets the Senate moving again for its regular duties as part of the appropriations process, and for a bill that actually cuts funding. Chairman Johnson and I have reduced funding in 24 separate programs in this budget, and including denying a brand-new courthouse for the veterans of court appeals, and pressuring the Army, for example, when we found a proposal to spend $1.4 million on a general's garden in Germany. When all of those 24 reductions were made, when we denied the new building, when we made the other reductions, we came in with a bill that is below the bill passed by the House of Representatives. That's why this legislation has come up. That's why the Senate voted 71 to 26 for cloture to bring the bill up. And I would just put the fact of the matter is this bill does actually comply with a budget. It complies with the House of Representatives budget, which is why it has such strong bipartisan support. And with that, let me suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, I ask the call of quorum be vitiated, please.
Without objection.
Mr. President, first of all, I want to congratulate my colleague, Senator Kirk, for bringing this to the floor and getting it through committee in a way that I think defines where we need to go. We were sent here not to continue to increase spending. We were sent here to try to find a sensible way of moving forward by reducing expenditures and still providing essential services that only the federal government can provide. And his committee, his subcommittee and committee have done that with this bill before us. And so I commend him for bringing this in under budget. Its savings have actually occurred. We're changing the culture of this United States Senate from one of ever-increasing spending to oversight and looking carefully at how we spend taxpayers' dollars. Every dollar is important, and we got a lot of those dollars stacked up in terms of debt that have to be addressed. And looking at each separate appropriation, really, and getting to regular order is where we need to get to. Now, we all know we can't get there until we settle this urgent question relative to raising the debt limit or dealing with the debt limit situation, but also, hopefully, accompanied by a sensible, rational plan moving forward that's credible with financial markets and credible relative to the process that we have to go through to address this really substantial debt hole that we are in and deficit spending that we're in. So anyway, this is a good, I see this as a good start. I'm not on that committee. I didn't come down for the purpose of addressing that specific bill, although I have looked at details as a member of the Appropriations Committee, and I think the Senator from Illinois and his colleague, the chairman, Senator Johnson, have come forward with a very good product that addresses our military construction needs and addresses our welfare benefits and does it in a way that shows that we can achieve savings from doing that. Mr. President, what I'd like to speak about just briefly is the balanced budget amendment that we will be dealing with shortly or perhaps later this week. When I first came to Congress, what I had committed to the people of Indiana was to support a balanced budget amendment. I had watched the process, and since I've been here and gone and now back, continue to watch the process where we just simply don't have that discipline that drives us to decisions that keeps our fiscal house in balance. There's so many temptations as a member of Congress to want to say yes to everybody. Everybody pleads their cause. They come in and they make it the case. And over the years, we have gradually accumulated a substantial amount of debt that we no longer can afford. And I think I came to the conclusion then, and based on historic analysis of the situation, but also nothing has changed as I look at the situation now, and that is we need something that locks us into a commitment to be careful with taxpayers' money and not spend more than we take in. Now, every family understands this, that there's a point at which you have to simply say we've got to stop spending at the rate we're spending because we cannot afford to get into debt. Every business understands that. Most of our local governments and state governments are now realizing that, and as we see across the country, very drastic steps need to be taken to get the fiscal house back in order. That hasn't happened yet at the federal level, and thankfully we have before us this week, first in the House of Representatives and now here, an attempt to debate and address the issue of a federal constitutionally mandated balanced budget. And I look forward to that debate. So just to, in a sense, start off with it, let's just look back at a little history. When the balanced budget amendment first came before the Senate in the 90s, not before, of course, but in 1997, our nation's debt stood at $5.36 trillion. Today, that debt has accelerated nearly 3 times to $14.3 trillion, and as we know, is accelerating even faster and climbing toward much higher numbers. We're borrowing more than 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. We know that's unsustainable, that ultimately that will have a negative impact. Well, it's having a negative impact right now on our economy, but it will continue to have an ever-increasing negative impact on our economy in the future if we keep doing that. We clearly, I think, need the backstop, need the commitment when we put our hand on the Bible and raise our right hand and swear in an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States that includes a commitment to be careful with the taxpayers' dollars, and particularly understanding the impact that deficit spending has on our economic prospects and on unemployment, a commitment to be open and fair and upfront with the taxpayer who's funding all of this. And this is our state of Indiana. Each year has to go before the taxpayers and say, you know, that's a nice proposal that we have here, but this is how much it's going to cost. And if you, the taxpayer, wants to pay for that in increased taxes, or you, the taxpayer, wants to pay for it by reducing spending somewhere else, one of those processes will keep us in balance. And we cannot end this session without achieving that balance. That's what our state has to go through every year, and that's true of the majority of states in this country. But it doesn't happen here. It's like, well, we can just borrow more and we'll worry about it later. Well, the end of that road is here. We've hit the wall. Later is no longer a viable option. More debt is no longer a viable option. And without a constructive plan in place to address this and address it now, we are going to continue, in my opinion, to remain here at stalemate. There's a lot going on here in the Senate. We've been in discussions hours upon hours upon hours, both sides and together, trying to figure out a plan that will put us on the path to fiscal responsibility that can both pass both the House and the Senate. But the opportunity now is here to accompany that plan with a balanced budget amendment. Now, we know it's going to take time to pass this. It requires 2/3 vote of each House. It then has to be, if passed and agreed on, it has to be sent to the 3/4 of the states, and 3/4 of those states have to ratify that. That's going to take several years. But if the American people understood that behind whatever plan we put in place to deal with our fiscal problems, we had a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution in place to back it up, they would have assurance that we're on the right track. I think that signal alone to the financial markets and the world markets alone, that would enormously impact psychologically the confidence in the American people and in investors around the world that the United States is seeing the problem, it has taken action, it is getting its fiscal house in order, and that the dollar will stay the world currency, and that America will be still the safest haven in the world to invest your funds. We see debt crises all over the world, and we see that our own dollar and our own safe haven is being challenged. We see the ratings agencies coming forward announcing a drop in our credit rating. The statistics are now in that a 1 percentage point increase in interest rates, which investors will demand if we don't show them a credible plan, produces over a 10-year period of time $1.3 trillion of extra money that we have to spend to cover our debt. We simply cannot continue this process, and the time to do it is now. Is it difficult? Yes, we've been trying to debate this thing and work on it ever since January. We are not there yet, but the clock is ticking toward August 2nd. This plan is not necessarily tied to debt limit, the balanced budget amendment, but putting a plan together is, and enforcing that plan and gaining the confidence of the American people that this will not just be something overturned by the next Congress, not just something that is a piece of paper that doesn't have long-term effect. It will be backed up by a balanced budget with the assurance that going forward, America will attend to its fiscal needs and stay strong as a nation financially as well as every other aspect. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, I ask to speak as if in morning business for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today I rise to address an issue of fairness for our National Guard soldiers. Our National Guard troops serve with honor and bravery at home and abroad. They have earned the respect and admiration of an entire nation with their incredible sacrifices over the last decade. We must not forget that they have also, in addition to our respect and admiration, earned their compensation and their benefits. To take back a veteran's compensation after she or he has fulfilled the requirements is unthinkable. Yet that is exactly what is happening around the country in regard to National Guard bonuses. Let me share with you the story of Private First Class Chelsea Wells. This story is emblematic of the struggle that many men and women in the National Guard are facing today. And I would like to thank Congressman Walden for bringing this situation to the public's attention and to my attention. I add my voice to his to call for fairness for Private First Class Chelsea Wells and for all other members of the National Guard. Private First Class Wells is from my home state of Oregon, where she has served in the Oregon National Guard for the last 3 years. In 2007, she enlisted as an intelligence analyst in response to the needs of the Army. At the time when she signed her enlistment document, she signed an additional document that stipulated she would receive a $20,000 bonus for enlisting in a critical military occupational specialty, or MOS. That agreement, which was also signed by the enlisting official at her processing station, stated that she would receive the first half of her bonus upon completion of her initial training, and the second half after 36 months of service. As planned, Private First Class Wells received that first $10,000 upon completion of her initial training. However, when her 36 months of service was completed, the second half of the bonus was nowhere to be seen. In fact, it was denied. Following an inquiry from Congressman Walden, the National Guard stated that the payments had been denied because her specialty was not on the critical skills list at the date of enlistment. However, the very document that Private First Class Wells signed was also signed by an enlisting official, very specifically listing her military occupational specialty, 35F, as being a critical skill specialty. I have that document right here. Annex E to Defense Department Form 4, Non-Prior Service Enlistment Bonus Addendum. It says the purpose of this form is to explain and confirm obligations to ensure that the agreement to these conditions is a matter of record. The whole entire point of this document is to ensure that there is a clear understanding in regard to the eligibility for bonuses. Now, this document says on its list of eligibility, and this section is signed by the soldier, I am enlisting into a critical skill military occupational specialty under the 6X2 or 8X0 enlistment option and will receive an NPS critical skill bonus 50-50 payment, meaning 50 after initial training and 50% at the end of 3 years. At the end of this document, it has Section 9, certification by service representative. I certify, it says, and this is in regard to the enlisting official, the recruiting officer. I certify that I have witnessed the reading and signing of the above agreement, and the signature appearing is that of the applicant. I have verified the soldier meets the eligibility requirements of NGR 600-7, paragraph 2 to 3, and the applicant's military occupational specialty is currently eligible for an enlistment cash bonus. I think that's pretty clear. The story gets even worse. Not only is our own military saying they're not going to award her second half of the bonus, but they want her to return the first half, because apparently they made some kind of mistake in between the recruiting officer and their higher-ups. I must say that any individual should have the right to a reward he or she was contractually owed. And there are no individuals who deserve the reward more than our brave men and women in uniform who have already made so many sacrifices, large and small, to ensure the security and safety of our nation. Private First Class Wells upheld her end of the bargain. She signed this document, enlistment document, in good faith. She answered the call to serve when she was needed, and she served with honor for the full term. Now we must uphold our promise to her and to other National Guard veterans who find themselves being punished by the same dispute that was no fault of their own, who signed these documents in good faith with the certification of the listing officer that they were indeed eligible. What is absolutely clear is that whatever dispute there may be between the listing officers and authorities higher up the chain, that is not Chelsea Wells' fault. She served in good faith under a very clear document, and we owe her and all the National Guard soldiers who are being pursued in the same fashion the bonuses that were promised to them. Mr. President, we ask a tremendous amount of those who serve. Now is when we should be giving back, not asking for more. Asking a soldier to give back money they've received under a document they signed in good faith and fulfilled in good faith is 100% unacceptable. I and my colleagues from the state of Oregon call on the National Guard today to resolve this matter and to make sure that this right is done, that this wrong is resolved. Thank you, Mr. President. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.